church? Hell no. Are you no longer feeling comfortable in church? This podcast is for individuals who are desperately missing God, but don't know how to find Him. Substance abuse, domestic violence, sex offenses, acrimonious divorce can contribute to discomfort in the church. For these individuals, church is just not an option anymore. Ordained minister Dennis Hall and his guests invite you to listen to this podcast for topics that are inspiring, uplifting, and will bring hope to those who just feel church is not relevant in their lives today.
I'm Dr. Dennis Hall, and I am delighted that you are listening to this podcast today, whether you're a new listener or a first-time listener. It's interesting that I don't know if it's just me or you, but it just seems like over the last 3 or 4 years, the term banana republic seems to show up more regularly in political rhetoric. You know, after the January 6, 2021 riot at the U.S. Capitol, we heard political leaders on both sides of the aisle say this kind of behavior is not acceptable. We are not a banana republic. Now, interestingly, we hear people in Canada saying that their country is becoming a banana republic. And then across the world in places like India, we hear their citizens saying that their country is becoming a banana republic. And then here in the United States, in recent weeks, we've heard the term used repeatedly by politicians and commentators. A couple of my listeners in just recent days have asked me, what is a banana republic? In other words, they were paying attention to what people were saying in the news. Now, some of you might be thinking, well, I haven't heard that. Well, if you haven't heard it, you're not paying attention. A banana republic is an odd term that most everyone agrees originated from American author O. Henry, pen name William Sidney Porter, who wrote about a fictional country called Anchuria in a series of short stories way back in 1901 based on his personal experiences in Honduras. You know, the original meaning coined in his stories was a country run by a dictator and his cronies with an economy dependent on a single product, namely bananas. Now, over the years, Americans have derisively talked about third world countries that were plagued by high crime rates and corrupt governments and severe economic problems and just an overall lack of civilized behavior. You know, the concept of a third world country has seemed to morph into the term banana republic. You know, examples of modern day banana republics would include, but not be limited to, places like Botswana and Costa Rica, Guatemala, Haiti, Honduras, Kenya, Nicaragua, Nigeria, Zambia, and even many other places. Now, here at home, the United States seems to become a little more degenerate with each passing day. And this didn't happen overnight. You know, it's taken decades to decline to get us to this point. And it seems to be increasing at an increasing rate. You know, we're bombarded every day with news stories reporting increase in crime, violent crime across the nation in cities like Chicago and New York and Philadelphia and New Orleans. And just over this recent Memorial Day weekend, it was reported that 41 people were shot in the streets of Chicago. You know, it's almost like we've become numb and immune to these reports. We don't even pay attention to them anymore. 41 people shot in the streets of one city, and it barely makes the news. You know, a couple of years ago, Our nation was shocked to see footage of thousands of discarded boxes and packages that had been stolen from cargo trains in Southern California. Now, I don't agree with much of what California Governor Gavin Newsom says on most things, but when he visited the site of this looting, his response was, "What the hell is going on?" He said the scene looked like what? A third world country. Yes, and we agreed with him. We agreed with him. In many metropolitan areas, it seems like criminals are caught and taken to jail, then they're very quickly put back on the streets. The news reported in Detroit that a drug dealer had doused his pregnant girlfriend with lighter fluid and set her on fire, and then he was granted a $5,000 bond and was set free to continue his terrorizing activities. She was 27 weeks pregnant with twins, and 60% of her body was burned, leaving her in critical condition. In another similar incident, a convicted drug pusher also doused his 26-year-old girlfriend with lighter fluid and set her on fire because they had had an argument. And he was almost immediately set free. Our country seems to be deteriorating at an alarming pace, and Americans are overwhelmingly agree that the country is headed in the wrong direction. According to a Reuters poll, 60% of Americans disapprove of President Joe Biden's performance. And most Americans feel that Biden has been a complete and utter disaster. But let me say this, all of our problems are not solely his fault. It has taken decades for America to get to this point in our history. Historian Victor Davis Hanson, he sums it up this way. He says, hard left woke ideology has all but obliterated the idea of a border. And millions of impoverished foreigners are entering the United States illegally. Health institutions like the NIH and the Centers for Disease Control, the CDC, have lost credibility. And after decades of improving race relations, America is regressing into some kind of a pre-modern tribal society. Crime is soaring, inflation is roaring, meritocracy is libeled, and so we're governed more by ideology and tribes. Now, that's the view of one contemporary historian, and I happen to agree with him. President Biden just announced that a new position in regard to the southern border that he thought was a great improvement, and it was an announcement that he was only going to allow 2,500 illegal people to come into our country per day. 2,500 illegal migrants per day. That is the position of this current administration. We're a deeply divided country filled with much anger and hatred. And as the scripture says and warns us in Mark 3:25, and if a house is divided against itself, it will not stand. It cannot stand. A crucial aspect of a banana republic is the practice of targeting political opponents or members of the opposition party so that the current leadership can maintain control of the nation. The dictatorial leaders of banana republics, they employ all kinds of forms of persecution on their opposition to ensure the downfall in elections, which are often touted as free and fair, but in reality are anything but. And that can include fraudulent trials to lock away their opponents, and charge them with any number of crimes, and it can even be as drastic as murdering them in the banana republics. What makes a banana republic is often very subtle and at the same time frightening, gradually turning a stable democratic nation into a nation of a corrupt regime, sometimes in a matter of years. In the words of former President Ronald Reagan, he said, "Freedom is a fragile thing, and it's never more than just one generation away." I think we can say the same thing about a constitutional republic like the United States. Today, there's a perception among most Americans that Joe Biden and the Democrats have ruthlessly weaponized the American justice system to go after their enemies and protect their friends. That's exactly why some are saying that the U.S. is now starting to look more like a backward banana republic than a constitutional democracy. It's been interesting to me to hear Democrats warn that Trump will take revenge on his enemies if reelected. The truth is that Trump has openly stated that revenge will not be a part of his administration if he's reelected. There's something called the Durham report that was published last year that revealed how the FBI was actively involved in perpetuating the lie that Trump colluded with Russia to win the 2016 presidency. Unfortunately, the media hasn't paid a lot of attention to that report. Their report found that the FBI began surveillance of the Trump campaign and used the infamous Steele dossier with its lurid, fabricated tales about Trump, despite all the while knowing it had been commissioned by Hillary Clinton's campaign. And while this was going on, the Bureau turned a blind eye to Hillary's mishandling of classified information, which involved keeping official emails on her private server, which she had, after investigations began, she had the servers wiped clean. And then Democrats then used the FBI pursuit of Trump to press for an appointment of a special counsel, Robert Mueller, to investigate him. Now, I got to tell you, I heard just recently one of the national commentators say that Trump has got to be the most investigated person on the face of the earth. This whole Democratic hit job and FBI with the FBI on Trump failed to remove him from office. But this Russian collusion hoax sidetracked his administration for more than half of his 4-year term. It's more than scandalous. It's more than scandalous that the FBI interfered in the political process to try to benefit one party. Congressional committees over the last 18 months have revealed that just 2 weeks before the 2020 election, Joe Biden's presidential campaign conspired with 51 former intelligence officers to draft a letter to discredit the New York Post's discoveries from Hunter Biden's laptop, which implicated Joe Biden in his son's shady dealings. They claimed in their letter that the story was a product of Russian disinformation. And it resulted in social platforms censoring the New York Post story. Thus, we had a presidential campaign collaborating with intelligence officials and a compliant media to censor journalists and deceive the public during an election. Now, would this have changed the outcome of the election? Now, we will never know. We'll never know that. But this interference was outrageous, just outrageous. And just last week, former President Trump was found guilty in a Manhattan, New York court of a crime that almost all legal analysts are unable to explain. In other words, they don't know what he was tried for or what he was found guilty of. The Constitution requires that any person accused of a crime must be told what crime they're accused of. Neither Trump nor his lawyers can explain what he's accused of. And it's widely agreed that this verdict will be overturned. And why? Because Trump was denied so many constitutional protections in this trial. Another trial against former President Trump in Atlanta, Georgia, the prosecutor who ran on a platform to get Trump has been removed from the case. And then down in this Mar-a-Lago case in Florida that accuses Trump of having really just a handful of confidential documents in this Secret Service protected residence, it's at a standstill because this judge is asking serious questions about the qualifications of this Democratic appointed prosecutor. Now, I just say, I'm afraid that I'm sort of sounding like some kind of a Republican operative. And I don't mean to be that. I'm just concerned about what's happening in our country. It's become obvious to the majority of the public that this barrage of charges against Trump is the result of the current president and his party trying to send his likely political opponent to jail. Now, these things shouldn't be happening in the Democratic Republic. These frantic efforts of law enforcement bodies trying to nail Trump stand in the stark contrast to the slow walking of investigations into Biden and his family. In the spring and summer of 2023, two Internal Revenue Service whistleblowers, came forward and accused Biden's appointees of undermining their investigations into his son Hunter. Under oath, these two agents testified that the DOJ withheld information from them, which allowed the statute of limitations on the crimes to lapse. And then they tipped off Hunter's lawyers about searches before they happened. And they forbade them from exploring Joe Biden's potential involvement. So you see, no wonder there are those who are calling us a banana Republican. Now, Hunter Biden has been found guilty of lying on a federal form to buy a gun. He indicated on the form that he was not on drugs and did not have an addiction. And it's clear to the public and the jury, based on the evidence, that at the time he was an addict. Now, this case is important, yes, but Hunter's also been indicted on 9 counts of tax fraud and tax evasion, among other crimes. That's the big picture. And this indictment on tax fraud provides spicy details about Hunter spending millions of dollars on prostitutes and drugs, claiming business deductions for exotic dancers in his tax returns, and just basically avoiding paying millions of dollars in taxes. But look, the bigger question that is not being asked is, how did Hunter earn those millions? It's becoming apparent that the Department of Justice wants these things to remain hidden. In other words, what are the links between untalented Hunter Biden and these foreign sources of income? What's the link? His only asset is, namely, his father, Joe Biden. And there's just mounting evidence that shows that President Biden clearly lied when he claimed that he had no knowledge of his son's business dealings and had not interacted with Hunter's associates. We now know that millions of dollars have gone to shell companies controlled by the Biden family. Last December, the House Republicans voted to authorize an impeachment inquiry to get to the bottom of the president's involvement. All of the Democrats voted against that. I guess they do not want to get to the bottom. They do not want to get to the bottom. So we're all sitting here with this apparent weaponizing of the justice system, and it's taking a toll on the public's confidence in the judicial system and in government generally. This is dangerous for our country. And, only half of Americans, according to polls, view the Department of Justice favorably, and trust in government in Washington is at 16%. 16%, near an all-time low. Now, recent polls seem to indicate that the campaign to bring down Trump is actually boosting his support. It has effectively turned him into a martyr. Despite his recent conviction, Trump still maintains a lead over Biden in the polls. Now, what does this say about the public's belief in the validity of the charges against Trump if a majority still prefer him as president? It appears that people can see through this political persecution and election interference. Increasingly, people are realizing that the officials' abuse of power is distorting American politics. For me personally, the cultural tsunami was when the home of former president at Mar-a-Lago, a place guarded by the Secret Service, was raided in the middle of the night. What for? Because he was accused of literally having a handful of confidential documents that some felt should have been left at the White House. I got to tell you, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? I mean, this one act makes us look like we've joined the ranks of Russia and Cuba and Zimbabwe and Uganda, Iran, and others who persecute their political enemies to stay in power. Now, as I begin to wind this podcast down, let me just say this to you. No matter what your perspective is on the condition of our country or who you think is primarily responsible, it's important for us to know that the Bible admonishes us with this: rejoice always, pray continually, give thanks in all circumstances, for this is God's will for you in Jesus Christ. 1 Thessalonians 5:18. Now, you might be thinking, I wouldn't be surprised, you might be thinking, thankful for what? Don't you see what's happening in our country? Well, I do see what's happening in our country, but there's some things that we can be thankful for. There's certain politicians that have suggested abolishing the Electoral College and eliminating the filibuster tool. But cooler heads prevented these things from happening. And we can be thankful that the Supreme Court eliminated the national law that permitted abortions and sent them back for each state to consider. That's where it should be taken up. In fact, we can be thankful that the overwhelming majority of the American people think our country's on the wrong track. And when we look at the madness that's around us, we can sit back and take comfort in the fact that God has told us, vengeance is mine, I will repay. God says, vengeance is mine, I will repay. And Proverbs 26:27 tells us, whoever digs a pit will fall in it, and he who rolls the stone will have to roll it back on him. And then verse 21 in Romans 12 directs us, do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Yes, overturn evil with good. That's why I was delighted to hear Trump say that if he is reelected, that revenge will not be part of his agenda. A new government needs to put an end to this vicious cycle that we've been witnessing. As I said in my last podcast, we can be thankful for our founding fathers who created a God-inspired Declaration of Independence, Constitution, and Bill of Rights. But we need to be careful. As the late Justice Anthony Scalia pointed out, the Soviet Union also had a Bill of Rights. It was just words on paper, a parchment guarantee. Ephesians 6 tells us that we're not fighting against flesh and blood enemies, but against evil rulers and authorities of the unseen world. In other words, demonic forces are influencing a movement to overthrow the United States as that city on the hill. Just today, just before I record this podcast, I listened to England's ambassador to the United States talking about how America and America's leaders are respected all over the world. We can't be so heavenly minded that we're not doing good here on earth. We need to shun complacency and let our voices be heard in all spheres of society. Yes, we are blessed. We live in a country that allows us to change the direction of our country at the ballot box. Thank you for listening to me, and I hope that you'll listen to the next podcast. God bless you.